to the people of Venezuela. Thank you.
First, I too would like to acknowledge the devastating loss of our friend and fellow Congressman Doug lamalfa. Doug was a loving father and husband and a staunch advocate for California's 1st Congressional District and rural America. Our prayers, we will probably say over and over for the next few days, are with Doug's wife and family as they grieve this unimaginable loss. Since I last stood at this podium, the extent of the Somali fraud in my home state of Minnesota has been exposed even further. 23-year-old independent journalist Nick Shirley put the sheer brazenness and magnitude of the fraud on full display by uncovering $110 million in daycare fraud in just one day. He simply looked for fraud and found it in a matter of hours. Our embarrassment of a governor and sorry excuse for an attorney general had 7 years to address it, and they didn't do a thing. I will also point out that our media has been asleep at the switch and has refused to do their job, which is holding people accountable on both sides of the aisle for their failures. Our worthless paper back at home is actually run by our governor's former commerce commissioner. And all they're still doing is trying to cover up for what is clearly one of the biggest fraud stories in the history of this country. From food nutrition assistance meant for children to fake autism centers and empty daycares. Tim Walz and Keith Ellison allowed fraudsters to take advantage of hardworking taxpayers at every turn. And now Walz is running scared. But let me be clear. Tim Walz dropping out of Minnesota's governor's race will not exempt him from the storm of accountability that is heading his way. Between the Oversight Committee's congressional investigation and President Trump's decisive action, Walz can try to run, but he's not going to be able to hide for long. The first assistant U.S. attorney for Minnesota revealed that the rampant fraud could reach a staggering $9 billion. Of the 98 people charged with fraud, 85 of them are Somali. Let me repeat again, that's $9 billion stolen from hardworking Americans to fund lavish lifestyles for Somali fraudsters and bankroll al-shabaab terrorists. And I have 3 words regarding Somalis who have committed fraud against the American taxpayer and have refused to assimilate as Americans. Send them home. Our nation will no longer tolerate those who take advantage of our charity and refuse to assimilate into our culture. The full weight of justice and accountability is coming for Tim Walz, his administration, and the depraved fraudsters. The time for swindling American people is over. And with that, I turn it over to Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Whip. I join all of my colleagues in mourning the loss of Doug lamalfa. Doug was a dear friend who I knew since the day he walked into Congress. And he was a gentle giant, you know, as a big guy who was just the warmest heart you could know, and had a great sense of humor and had a passion for water issues, for Western issues. He was the chairman of the Western Caucus, you know, really cared about natural resources issues and fought for all of those and talked about them on the House floor with members of Congress all the time. Doug was respected by everybody, Republicans, Democrats alike. It's a big loss for all of us. And we know he leaves behind a loving family, a wife and young kids, and we're going to continue to keep him in our prayers. So it's a tough way to start a new year, but we also know what challenges are ahead for the country that we want to continue to work on addressing. We did a lot last year to start reversing the damage that President Trump and all of us inherited from the Biden years. The high inflation, the high interest rates, so many rules and regulations that were targeted to hurt families, to increase costs for families that we have been working to reverse. President Trump's done a lot of things through executive action. We worked closely with the president on things like the working families tax cuts, other big bills, over 20 CRAs, Congressional Review Acts, reversing costly, ridiculous Biden-era regulations so that we can lower costs for families. And we're going to continue. We have a lot more work to do. We talked about this yesterday very extensively. President Trump was fully engaged with our members yesterday, as he has been this entire first year. It's not even a full year in office. And yet we have seen an incredibly engaged president who is working with a Republican House and Senate and Congress to fight for the American people who had been left behind by the previous administration. We talked about what we can do to keep lowering costs in areas like energy, where in many states are now finally seeing less than $2 a gallon gasoline. That's more money in the pockets of families. Working on lowering health